You're listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, brought to you by the Raven Creek Social Club, where we talk about faith and other oddities. For questions, comments, or to be part of the conversation, join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where you can find us at Raven Creek SC. Now for your hosts, Emily Dixon and Nathan Underwood.
So we looked up in the attic, and I'm looking around the room here just to make sure he's not around. We mentioned the Nightcrawler action figure before, or Nightcrawler. I know we mentioned Nightcrawler. I don't remember if we mentioned the action figure, but Emily had one and I had one, and I can't imagine that I got rid of it. But I would assume that in the moving, he would have gotten put with all of my Star Trek action figures at some point. But I think he may have also gotten placed in a random decor box that's somewhere in the house, because he did hang up and sit on shelves and stuff.
I was getting ready to say, we didn't like play with him like a toy, because I think we both got him when we were a little older. So
yeah, we were both adults when we got him.
Yeah, he kind of just lived wherever we wanted him to. Mine hung off the mirror when I was living on the farm, and he just kind of hung around. And there's a good possibility my oldest daughter stole mine.
Right.
Yours are still too young to go klepto on you.
Well, they did finally convince me to let them play with Leo Prime.
I found his arm, and
yeah, his arm's around here somewhere. Yeah, he's always missing limbs. I need to find. I'll post it on the Instagram. There's occasionally I'll find him like laid out somewhere in some weird position, and it's like, Leo's having a bad day today.
Well, I like, wait a minute. I said, this came off your dad's, and your oldest like, yeah, he lets us play with it. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to take your word for it.
Yeah. It's they finally convinced me now. The Doctor Who Lego set up there, they're not getting a hold of that. That thing's staying where it is.
Yeah, you were always very protective of your Legos. I didn't get to play with your Legos.
Well, the thing with the Lego stuff, like, especially like the ships and things, that it took so much time to build them, and I need to go get the ones from Mom's house, because I put those up on the soffit in her kitchen, and I think that kind of drove her a little crazy.
But the thing is, they're still there. I mean, like,
are they still in the soffit? I thought she had put them in storage.
They're either there or they're in the back bedroom somewhere.
Okay, yeah, I need to go get them and put them up here, because I love the shelf that we have around the.
Yeah, I'm kind of jealous, but of course I live in a camper, so I'm pretty much jealous with anything that says, hey, there's room to expand.
Yeah, but I did find some of my old comic books up there. This is actually, I had like, I didn't even count them. I think like 10 comic books that I had growing up that I read over and over, because there wasn't a comic shop in Muskogee, for one. And so you buy them at the grocery store, like savages. And and so you just kind of got whatever Homeland happened to have in stock. And, anyone who's been to Homeland knows that it's definitely not a library.
Well, I mean, that's just the joys of living in small town Oklahoma, because the town we actually grew up in had 2 convenience stores, one restaurant that may or may not be operational at any point in time.
Right, because it was switching owners constantly.
Yeah, and that was it. There's a post office.
Right.
And so then the next biggest towns, they weren't that big, and they didn't have, like Nathan said, bookstore for a long time. Basically, if you're going to do real shopping for any kind of specialty item, you had to make an hour drive. Yeah. And so for us, that was kind of a big deal, because we never went to Tulsa.
Right. Yeah. And that's still the closest comic book shop to Muskogee is in Tulsa.
Yeah, definitely.
And, yeah. I'm looking at the cover of Cable here. What number is that? I can't even see, but it's on the cover. It says still $1.50. I'm like, oh man, I wish comics were still $1.50. That'd be kind of nice.
But think of how many yards we had to rake to make $1.50.
That's true. during that phase. So
yeah, because allowances were not like something our family did. It was like, no, you're going to go out and work for it. So that's the reason why you still have these. These are like highly priced, bought with blood, sweat, and tears kind of things.
Yeah. And I've got, I actually have a larger collection of comics. It's not extensive. It's just kind of things that interested me, either for the artwork or for the storyline, because I mean, you can get into some really deep end stuff with comics when it comes to art and with with philosophy. There's actually, it's kind of funny. There's an issue of Captain Marvel where at the end of this issue, and I found it not too long ago, and I put it back up on the shelf, and I need to pull it back out again because at the end of it, like people come around and just pack up the universe like it's a movie set, and Captain Marvel's just kind of left in this blank screen. But that happened during a time in my life when the projects that I had originally moved to Norman for, it was a church plant. The church plant had failed, and actually a little bit of history with me and my wife, Micci. She and I dated, and then she broke up with me the same week that the church plant closed its doors. And then I go to Borders. It was still open at the time. And I pick up, I'm looking for some comic to read, something to do. And I'm reading, and like, this is the one I pick up, is the one where like, oh, well, that's exactly how I feel right now. So I have that one somewhere around here. It's still very near and dear to me.
But they did return to their romance. What? How many? It was a few years later,
It was
wasn't it?
about 3.5 years that
Yeah.
we didn't talk at all. And then we started talking again. And basically it was more of like, why are we not together? But I think ultimately is we both needed to have a little more life experience under our belts. And I know I matured a lot during that 3.5 years. And
I'm going to plead the fifth because I don't want to get into that.
and I know that we both kind of had different perspectives when we got back together. And so I think that's a good place to leave that story for now.
Well, I will add this little epilogue. We came in here, Micci was in the kitchen fixing up lunch, and you were in there just jumping in where needed and picking up the slack and taking care of the oldest daughter who was reluctantly eating her ramen. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, y'all guys have made it work, and I think it's pretty cool that things kind of came full circle, and now you're back here in Norman, both of you, and
Yeah.
it's
And-
craziness.
And we confirmed it for you. For anyone who heard any of the screaming on the last episode, we confirmed they were not being abused. Apparently it was a fight over some Halloween decorations or something.
And the youngest child bit the oldest child in the back. So that's what was the massive scream.
Yeah. Actually, I was back bitten once by one of my cousins growing up. And really, someone bites you in the back. It's really funny that that's a phrase. I don't know. Does it happen often enough that we have a phrase called backbiting? Because I know it's happened to me. Apparently it just happened to my oldest.
I want to say that the sister between us, or one of the sisters between us, actually did it to me at some point.
So I guess that's a thing that people do instinctively, children anyway. I mean, I hope that, the adults I hear using that phrase are using it metaphorically.
Or in a context where we are not going to explore on this episode. So
that being said, we're here to wrap up. We're here to wrap
Nice
up the
segue.
Beatitudes. Because that's the next logical step to what we're doing.
absolutely. So you're actually going to be taking us through Matthew, and I'm going to be kind of inserting some different perspectives as far as what Luke had to say, and maybe some historical notes. But I think for the most part, you're going to drive the bus on this one.
Yeah, feel free to jump in at any time. I mean, it's not like
It's
whatever
my prerogative as the older sister. I get to.
well, I mean, yeah, it's not like that's anything that doesn't go without saying. You're going to do that either way, so
Yeah, can't stop me.
you can't stop you. So, now basically, as we go through this, I want to just kind of go over basically some stuff that I'd done years ago in a study before, and as I was leading a small group, and talk about some specifics of the Beatitudes and how sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong, and just what that means. So the first one, Jesus goes up on the hill. And one of the things I want to do is, we'll kind of give you the references, but we're not necessarily going to read everything. But Matthew 5, the Beatitudes start in verse 3 and go on to 11 in this one. So the Beatitudes, like we covered before, they kind of follow that formula of blessed is. We talked about blessed means God's with you. It's not just, quote, happy, as a lot of Sunday school teachers have said. Now,
Or even some Bible translations, unfortunately.
do they? Just some of the translations say that?
Yeah.
I don't guess I've used any of those translations.
Consider yourself blessed.
With God.
There you go.
So, anyway, so we all know that the blessed is the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That one I think is really interesting. Now, as we go through these, because you wanted to talk about some of the stuff in Luke too, so I think we should kind of hit the parallels as we go along.
I agree.
So I'm going to go ahead and jump into this, but growing up, blessed are the poor in spirit is one of those phrases that the meaning may not necessarily be obvious, and especially if we're talking about Jesus saying that someone's blessed because of it, and not necessarily blessed because of it, but just that they are blessed. And poor in spirit, growing up in Sunday school, I had always heard that poor in spirit meant that you were someone who recognized the fact that God was great and it humbled you, and you were striving to be humble and see other people as better than yourself, and that it was some kind of what's the word?
It's kind of a badge of honor.
Badge of honor. I want to say meritorious act, but that's not exactly how I would want to phrase it. But it's some kind of
It's kind of like you have attained this level of recognizing what a wretched sinner you are, that you've achieved something in that recognition.
Well, and it's not even recognizing it. It's striving to play the role. And
that
is
might be
how I've kind of heard it portrayed and explained growing up. And that definition really, it never set well with me, because it didn't seem to make any sense, because the wording seemed pretty plain to be someone who's poor in spirit would be someone who is morally bankrupt, or who is not living their life well. And here you have Jesus saying, oh, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And so as we look at this, it's kind of more of a proclamation that God's here to redeem that. And I was going through, as I was studying this years ago, I came across an article where it suggested that actually the first four of the Beatitudes are actually negative things that God is coming to redeem. And then the others are positive.
Which that puts Matthew's Beatitudes very much in line with the apocalyptic literature that we were talking about, that God is going to come back in these final days and he's going to redeem these things. And so this kind of gives us the way that Matthew is looking at this, that this is not wisdom lit.
Right.
This is God showing up and being on the scene to bring about something new.
Exactly. And so we have this idea that, yes, we have that recognition, but it's not something to strive for. It's something that is. Because, and I always think of, back in the day, I was hanging out at a friend's house, and I had a friend who had, in his living room, had like 3 to 4 different TVs, depending on his roommate situation and his budget and whatnot, because he and his friends, and myself included, I wasn't as big into games as they were, but they were really into games, and they were more into tabletop games, but they were also into video games. So I was over there and I was playing a video game on one TV, and a group of people are watching one of the shows, and I want to say it was 24. I could be wrong. They were watching some crime drama show on one of the other televisions, and one of the lines, and this was, back in the early days of the internet, before everyone really kind of understood what it was.
Do we understand what it is?
We don't really. I think it might actually be a plot, but that's a whole nother. I'm kidding. We are not a conspiracy theory show. But
Usually.
not. But one of the lines I remember is, the computer expert hacker person on the team is looking through what's going on with this virus, and it goes, and the line was, "It looks like they're trying to corrupt the internet." And one of my friends goes, "You can't do that. It came that way." And that's kind of, I think, a good illustration, a good way of thinking about, blessed are the poor in spirit. It's not something we should strive for. We came that way.
Right.
We showed up to the scene in need of a savior, and God's here to redeem that. And so it's this proclamation. It's one of the first things that Jesus says in this whole sermon is, hey, you know what? Sinful people who can't save themselves, God is here for you. And not like to take it out, and he's here to save you. You're going to be included in the kingdom, and that's great news.
Yeah.
Now, you had actually had taken some, I think you had some information where he parallels either a book in the Old Testament, or were you going to hit up Luke real quick?
Actually, oh my goodness, I left my notes in the other room.
Oh, that's okay.
Because there is parallels in the Old Testament.
Do you have a cross reference there?
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, what do we want to do?
Let's pause for a moment, and I will retrieve my book.
Just a second. So, via the magic of television / YouTube, it's been mere moments for you.
A heartbeat.
Just a heartbeat away. Emily now has her notes. Let me go back to where I was in the Bible. But so we're going to be going back to, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And one of the things then, and this is actually, as we were preparing for this episode, I actually learned quite a bit from Emily on these, because I didn't realize quite how much that the Sermon on the Mount paralleled a lot of the Old Testament teachings.
And I'm just hitting the bare minimum here. This is Isaiah 61, verses 1 and 2, which is part of what Jesus, if you look in the book of Luke, Jesus reads this at one point, and it kind of becomes the mission statement of his entire ministry. And so I'll read those right quick. And this actually covers not just blessed are the poor in spirit, it also covers blessed are those who mourn. So verse 1, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, and the day of vengeance of our Lord, to comfort all who mourn. So this is really kind of the foundational piece of Jesus' ministry. And the fact that he kind of restates it here in this formula that we've known as the Beatitudes, and makes it very accessible and very memorable by kind of stripping away, I don't want to say the extraneous stuff, but just kind of boils it down. So
right.
He restates it so you can participate in it as a listener.
Yeah, that's good. So now you said you want to also take a look at the Beatitudes in Luke as well.
Because he does include this. Luke does not have a parallel for all of the Beatitudes that Matthew offers us, but he does include it. And his is just, blessed are the poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. And so the poor in spirit, it's not there. But Matthew, he's not as focused on the idea of Jesus being Messiah.
Right.
He's more focused on the people in front of him, the problems that they're facing. And Matthew talks a lot about wealth and power and influence. And when he talks about the poor, he's talking about people who are on the fringes of society, the marginalized.
Was that Matthew or Luke?
Sorry, Luke.
Okay.
And we'll get too many names running around. And Luke includes a lot of stories. We have lots of stories about women. We have stories about Romans. We have stories about people who are not part of the covenant community yet.
Right.
And Luke is very focused on the fact they're going to be included. So he's not so much worried about their spiritual condition at this point as he really is talking about the physicality of being human and their social position, which makes sense with Luke being a doctor. And this also puts Luke less as an apocalyptic writer of the Beatitudes and makes him more in the tradition of the wisdom literature.
Right. And that's actually you're talking about the physical thing. We actually kind of see some of that in some of the Beatitudes with Matthew, and that's where we get into that. And I'm not going to cover every single Beatitude in detail, because the second one is, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. I don't feel like I need to explain that to anyone.
We might not be the podcast for you if we do.
other than to say, I mean, I don't know. There may actually be something. I don't know. I'm going to take us on a tangent now. Other than to say, there's a growing trend that I have noticed in churches and in worship music, and that's this idea of this conjured up kind of brokenness. That if, in order to really have an encounter with God and a worship experience, you've got to, verbally flagellate yourself in order to get to a point where you're just broken and mourning over your own wicked state, and how you need to do that every Sunday, and, get to that state of mourning so that you can be comforted by God. And I think we lean a little too much on that, especially, sometimes, hey, we have a decent week, and it's okay to enjoy that and celebrate that. And you're not worshiping or praising God any less by skipping your morning hour. So that that's something that springs to mind. But other than that, we're not going to go super deep into all these. Now, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. I'm sure we've all heard that one. And that's actually one that is it's not very attractive. Because again, we kind of see it as something that, oh, well, if we're going to inherit the earth, we better strive to be meek. And now we get there's kind of been some confusion on this, because I have heard, growing up, we always talk about, well, meek means you're strong, but you're controlled. You have it together. You could, like a horse with a bridle. It's a strong horse, but it's meek because it's being controlled. And we need to do that with our flesh and control it. And I think that kind of, I think when you brought out this, the Old Testament parallel, which, go ahead and do you have that pulled up there?
That's Psalms 37:11. And the verse says, but the meek shall inherit the land. And the Hebrew word there is eretz, which is also translated earth sometimes. And so the meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant peace. And when you go back and you read this entire psalm, and it's actually a pretty lengthy one, it's talking about God coming for his saints, and the fact that God is going to be there with those who have been oppressed by the wicked. And it's not so much this idea of even strength under control. It's just those people who have been subjected to abuse to the point that they have nothing left to fight with. And it's only God who's going to be able to come in and rescue them from the situation. And when he does, it's going to be an over-the-top, just mind-blowing rescue. You're going to look for the wicked, and they're going to be no more. And he is going to bring forth justice. And so it's just the idea of justice in God's presence.
Yeah. So now, next is, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Now, I have a lot to say about this one, because this one, growing up, we always kind of had, I always had this teaching from a lot of pastors: blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are those who are doing their quiet time, who are showing up to every single service, who are just on fire for Jesus and just so in love with God that everything they do is pursuing Jesus. And nothing wrong with pursuing Jesus. That's fantastic. But that's not really what this verse is about. Because righteousness is, in the Hebrew translation, this is actually something I learned from Emily as she was going through her master's program, is that righteousness means love and kindness, or someone who performs acts of love and kindness. So when we say, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and especially, following it up on, blessed are the meek, blessed are those who have been deprived of acts of love and kindness, because they'll be satisfied. In my kingdom, if you're coming in and you have not been shown love in your life, this is where you can find it. That's a big deal, because with hunger and thirst for love and kindness. And what do you hunger and thirst for? Things that you have done without.
Mhm.
And so whenever you really unpack that with an understanding of righteousness is not, oh, I want to be in right standing with God. It's, no, nobody treats me well, and I need to find it. And the kingdom is where you find it.
And I think that's something we can see. It's prevalent in today's society. I mean, how many times have we gone to someone who they're just having a bad day, and if you're nice to them, and you can see them just break wide open because they've been so deprived of that loving kindness. And these aren't even always big acts. Sometimes they're just small considerations.
Mhm.
And we as Christians need to be responsible for enacting the kingdom of God through those little small kindnesses and declaring that this is God's rule. But this beatitude is actually based on Isaiah 55, 1 and 2. Come, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and he who has no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money on what is not bread, and labor for what does not satisfy? Listen diligently to me and eat what is good, and delight yourselves in rich food. So the idea that when you are present with God, you're going to have this overabundance. And what happens when you have an overabundance? It's easy to share.
Mhm.
So if we are participating in God's kingdom, we're experiencing loving kindness from our Father, and then we disseminate that further.
Yep. Another one, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Is that one in Luke as well? I don't remember
That
which one he
one-
parallels. But there's not a lot that I have to say about that one, other than sometimes we go through these, a lot of times we think that Jesus is talking about pie in the sky, which, after we're dead and gone, this is what's going to happen. Suffer through this life, and then you'll get a reward, which sometimes there are things that, I think there are some things that go that way, but sometimes I think Jesus is talking just about like how the world works. And hey, if you're merciful, you'll be shown mercy. It's kind of like in the Proverbs, a kind answer turns away wrath. So, sometimes we need to just be kind to people and understand that if you are good to people, people oftentimes will be good to you. Now, of course, that's not hard and fast rule. Again, you're talking about the wisdom literature side of things. Where sometimes those are not just about.
They aren't these great spiritual truths.
They're not formulas. There's almost random aspect of the universe that, we can do the best thing, and Jesus addresses that too, or we can do the right thing, the wise thing, because we are instructed, in the Proverbs to be smart with our money, to plan for the future. But then Jesus also says, talks about the guy who fills his barns and then dies the next day.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of times with wisdom literature, they're very earthy, and so that's what I meant by they're not great spiritual truths. I mean, they're very earthy. Just this is the nuts and bolts of life,
Mhm.
and I think we overlook that. I mean, because if you get to reading Proverbs, there's some stuff like a bribe pays the way. Are we supposed to bribe people? Probably not, but at the same time, that's just a truth.
Sure.
That's just a fact. So this one is kind of more loosely based on Proverbs 14:21. Whoever despises his neighbor is a sinner.
Mhm.
Pretty harsh, but blessed is he who is generous to the poor.
Hmm.
And so this idea that if you love your neighbor, you're going to be merciful
Right.
to your neighbor. So
Right. And then blessed are the pure in heart actually ties in really well with that same idea of blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Ties really well with that same idea that, sometimes this stuff might be for here before we're dead and gone. And, it's not like, oh, I got to work to purify my heart, which, we should work to purify our hearts. We're told in the Bible to purify ourselves. Right. And, you can kind of parallel that with ritual purity, that, if you aren't pure, you can't go into the temple. But the idea here, and what it rings true to me when I think about this, and my opinion's worth the paper it's written on, but from what I have seen, I think we need to look at this and say, if we're pure in heart, we're going to see God, we're going to see what he's doing in the world, and we're going to find a place to join him and partner with that. And I think too often we tend to separate ourselves out from God's work in the world. And I think it was Donald Miller who said, we don't have to, if we think we need to serve poor people in another country, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to try to work and sweat and strain to figure out how to serve people and give them provisions. There's organizations all over the world that are working to help poor people. Go join one.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that people who are generous are working there, and God is moving people's hearts to be generous and do good and serve with acts of love and kindness. And so we can go and be part of these organizations and be there and serve people and give them food and bread and water. And if we aren't going, we can support them financially to go and do these things, because the framework's already there.
Mm-hmm.
And every one of these groups is looking for people who can go and help.
Well, I think so often we've been conditioned in Christian culture to be on guard against evil society and the world. And so when we look out around us, because we're looking for that, that's our focus.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of being pure in heart is, are we looking for God? Are we trying to see where he's active and what he's doing? And so it is simply realign your focus. Start looking for him and quit looking for evil.
Yeah,
and because
that's good.
You have to understand evil in order to see it sometimes. And so is that a pure heart that understands evil? That's, I'm asking.
You mean in order to spot evil where it doesn't exist? It would be an indication of an impure heart.
Okay, let's give here's an example. On the internet right now, there's this huge buzz about whether Monster has the 666 in its Monster logo. And because the way the M is drawn, it looks like a Vav, which is the Hebrew letter / and or number for 6.
Right.
And so, what are you looking for when you see those kinds of things?
Right.
I think you're looking for evil. You aren't.
Well, let's go a little more practical, because that's like getting your conspiracy theory wacko who's gonna not look for anything good no matter what. Let's go a little more practical. How many times have I heard in a sermon, not necessarily in a sermon, but in some kind of teaching, oh, you need to limit your social media time, which I think, you can definitely get addicted to social media. You can spend too much time on it. I probably spend too much time on it, but that's just a confession there. Pray for me, guys. I probably actually need a little help with that. But think about this. The Scandalous group, again, we're going to plug that, but it's just a great example. You started that with a smartphone and just a desire to help other people. And so you took something that, it's to the point where I actually, when I was working at Guitar Center with, I was helping this lady check out, and she was asking about guitar lessons. And she asked if I knew anyone in her town. I said, I don't know anyone in that area who does guitar lessons, because we would refer to teachers quite a bit. And then I said, I learned to play just getting on the internet. And she goes, oh, internet, that's a dirty word. Like, that's how far some people take it. But yeah, well, what are you using the internet for? Yeah, if you're using it for pornography, or if you're using it for just escapism, then yeah, it's going to be a bad thing. But if you're using it actively to help build communities, then go for it. I mean, and there are churches who use I was at a church who used this one social networking app that was specifically designed for churches. I'm going, why are we doing this? Everything this app does, Facebook does better, for one. And almost everyone in the church has Facebook already. There are a few people who don't, and they make that choice to stay off of it, and that's totally fine. But it just makes no sense to me that we want to try to reinvent the wheel with a Christian label. And it's, I kind of think also about Jesus when the disciples came and they said, hey, we found someone who's preaching and casting out demons in your name, but they're not one of your disciples. And Jesus is like, let them. They're doing good. Let them do good. And so, I don't know. So that's my little tangent on the church wanting to reinvent the wheel every time they think that they can meet a need.
Well, and it comes back down to, is the God who lives within us really greater than the world around us? And I think we have to deliberately affirm that in our lives and to ourselves, that God, greater is He who is in me than in the world. And we have to live out that truth and stop being afraid of pollution from the outside. And so, yeah, because you and I can both go off on that one. And because we live very deliberate lives where we do not segregate ourselves from people who are not believers. And we try to have those conversations, meaningful conversations with just whoever happens to be around. And that's not saying that we got it all figured out. It just means that we have made it a priority to engage this world, because they need to see the God who's in us, and we need to stop worrying that the outside world might pollute God somehow.
Right.
He's holier than that. He's greater than that. And if we ever start bowing to that fear because we're scared of this evil world out there, then we're denying the truth of the gospel.
Right.
So, okay, I'm going to get off my soapbox now. This one actually is paralleled in Psalms 24, verses 4 and 5. It says, "He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false, and does not swear deceitfully, he will receive blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation." So he will receive loving kindness from the God of his salvation.
Right.
So I love that. Anyway.
The next one is one of my favorites because it's just fun to tell the story and piece it all together. I love retelling how this all cobbled together in my mind. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be
cheesemakers?
peacemakers.
Cheesemakers.
Did I say cheese? You didn't.
They will inhibit their girth. Oh, sorry, I watched Life of Brian recently.
The peacemakers, Monty Python.
I had to throw that in.
Showing up like the Spanish Inquisition there. But the blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Now, when I taught this one years ago, this one was one that I kind of went on a kind of roundabout trip to get there, because we often hear verses, in particular those of us in the church, we often hear verses so much that we're like, okay, this means that, because we've been told that this means that, and this means that. And one verse means the other, but we don't often read the text and see what it says. And so one of the tricks that I picked up, I don't remember who it was who told me this, was if you come across a verse like that where you feel like you're too familiar with it to really penetrate the meaning and get in there and pick it apart, just in your mind, take the word, isolate the key words, and then figure out what they would mean in another context. And so as I did this, blessed are the peacemakers, peacemaker, keyword. So I pull out the word peacemaker. And of course, the first thing I thought of, because Dad watched a lot of Westerns, was the Colt 45 single action army pistol, also known as the Peacemaker. And I was pretty certain that Jesus was not blessing projectile weaponry that had not yet been invented. I'm sorry for any of our gun people out there. I don't think that's where he was going, but that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day. Anyway, so I was not content with that. So I got to looking at peacemaker, and I did some looking into some Jewish sources about peace. And peace means is our equivalent to shalom. It's our closest translation. Which anytime any religion has the word peace, look up what their version of peace means, because in Greek, that's the closest. The Greek word for peace was the closest they had to the Hebrew word for peace, but the Hebrew word for peace means nothing missing and nothing broken. And that means that your relationship with your family, with yourself, with God is all together, with your community, and it's full, it's complete, and it's not just an absence of war. And that's where you get in the Greek and the English versions, the absence of war. And so I was thinking about this. To make peace, it takes a lot. Even if you're just going with the version of the absence of war, absence of conflict, making peace takes a lot. Anyone who's been married or been in a family or interacted with people know that if you have someone you're having a hard time with it takes a lot, first off, to get over your own pride and sometimes say you're wrong. But then to go those extra steps, not only to just go, oh, I apologize, so it's on them now, to take that extra step and actually make peace. I mean, if you've ever been in a family situation where people are, there's tension, people don't even want to be in the room, and you're the one to bring up the issue so they can talk about it, that's a scary place.
That's terrifying.
And so, and we think about it, and I first thought of it this way, and then it kind of moved on from there, but I first thought of it this way: is blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. We think of people who are highly influential in our lives. What do we refer to them as? We refer to them as like a godsend or something like that may be sent by God. But it actually goes even farther than that. Because as I was reading through some different Hebrew sources, I came across the story of Aaron. And Aaron, as in Moses' brother, and he was said to have been a bringer of peace. And there's some Talmudic stories. Sorry, can't speak there, but there's some Talmudic stories about Aaron. And whenever there would be conflicts in the camp, he would go to one of the people. He said he would dress himself in sackcloth and cover himself with ashes, and he would go and sit with the first offended party and wail and moan with them because he was sad for the loss of this relationship, and he had just got done speaking with the other person, and they were mourning the loss of the relationship as well. And he would sit with that person and talk to them until they had removed all enmity from their heart, as the text says. And then he would go to the second person and do the same thing until peace was restored. And so people who made peace in the time of the Second Temple were often referred to as disciples of Aaron, or sons of Aaron, which son and disciple, because if you look at the rabbinic teaching style and rabbi-disciple relationship, it wasn't just like we sit at a desk and we learn. It was you imitate your rabbi. The disciple imitates the rabbi so much that they're called sons of that rabbi. And so Jesus is saying, blessed are the peacemakers, because you'll be called the sons of. Everyone would have expected sons of Aaron from any other rabbi, but Jesus says sons of God. He was saying, if you bring peace, if you restore a relationship, bring wholeness to any place, people will say, you have learned from God. You have been discipled by God. And so I think of course, I don't think the word discipled would have been used. I don't think that's actually a verb. But you'll be considered a disciple of God, which is pretty cool. I mean, if you think about it, who else would you want to be taught by?
Well, and we can get to the whole concept of sonship as far as being a son of God and or a child of God, if we want to be more politically correct. But the idea that we are going to be included in His family, and Paul's going to talk about us becoming the sons and daughters of God later on in the New Testament, and he's going to talk about the benefits of adoption and the fact that this has not only does it have benefits, but there's obligations, there's responsibilities that come with this. And so being a peacemaker is one of them. So if you're going to be a son of God, if you're going to join this New Testament family, this covenant of faith, this community of faith, this is what Paul and Jesus and those around you should expect to see, is that you're going to be making peace among not just the people that are near and dear to you, but also in the world. And we can do that so easily. I don't think we realize that many times making peace it can be those big moments like you're talking about,
right,
but it can also just be little things to smooth the way.
Yep. Now these last two kind of go together. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, and for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you, persecute you, and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, and so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now, the thing I find interesting about this is the people who were doing the talking and the persecuting and the reviling, as it were, they weren't people outside the church. We have got to get over in America. We've got this idea that, well, people outside the church aren't going to like you if you live your life for Jesus. And yeah, you might run into some conflict if you're being combative, if you're just straight up walking up to people and being like, oh, you're an evil sinner and you're just a wretched person. And they don't understand where you're coming from because they don't see the world from a biblical viewpoint, that we are sinners in need of a savior. Jesus was not talking about people outside of the faith when he was talking about the people who were persecuting and reviling. He was talking about who? The religious leaders. And so we've got to understand that sometimes if we are doing what Jesus calls us to do, then we are going to get some pushback.
Well, this is an ongoing pattern throughout the Old Testament. And when God would send a real prophet, they put them in wells, they stoned them, they did all these horrible things to them. And it was because they were saying things that the religious community did not like. And it upset the status quo. And so Jesus is saying, hey, if you're going to be in my kingdom, expect this to happen to you.
Right.
And this is to the point that when we look in the book of Jeremiah, we know that Jeremiah is the true prophet. Hananiah is a false prophet. And Jeremiah accuses Hananiah of saying peace where there is no peace. And this becomes the standard, kind of the gold standard in rabbinic schools of thought, that if a prophecy was too pretty, if it was too smooth, if it felt good on your ears, then it was false.
Right.
It was only prophecy that shook you from your complacency and really drove you to look for God, that angered or offended you, that was true prophecy. And, and I think this kind of goes against today. In a lot of churches, we're being taught that, oh, if you give a prophetic word to someone, it should only be uplifting. It should be, and it's this sweetness. And prophecy was not sweet. Go back and read Ezekiel. If you ever want to know for a fact, prophecy is not sweet. I won't go into it right now. Maybe one day we'll get to go through Ezekiel.
That could be fun.
That could be fun. It's not sweet. And so I think a lot of people forget that the Bible really does come to confront people, but it's the people who are in relationship with God. And the thing is, and this is the other thing that drives me crazy. Any goodness you see me as a Christian, anything that I might do right, it isn't because I got it right.
Right.
It's because I've been empowered by the Holy Spirit who dwells in me, by the grace of God. It's this whole thing that I have been invited to participate in and I have chosen to become a part of. I didn't do it. God's doing it through me. So why do we expect this world, this outside world, who does not have the benefit of this grace,
right,
to be able to step up and do the things that you and I struggle to do despite the empowerment? So, okay. I can get really wound up on this because I see this all the time. And I want to look at Christians and say, hey, do you realize this isn't supposed to be a bed of roses? And this is supposed to cost you. And Jesus reaffirms it in his first major public teaching.
Right.
So,
and I think whenever we go through and walk through the Beatitudes in that manner, it makes more sense. Things don't seem as heavy. It doesn't seem like a crazy burden that's being placed on you. And I feel like the way that we always learned it growing up, it felt like, just so you know, this is unachievable and you're probably going to hell.
Well, and the things that we thought we understood were actually abstractions. They weren't concrete. They didn't have a nice little way to grab hold of them. And so when we put them back into an Old Testament context and even a Second Temple lit context, we began to see, oh, these make sense.
Well, they do. I mean, and that's the thing that, when you get away from the what Michael Heiser refers to as the X-Files view of inspiration, where the writers went into auto writing mode, and then we're like, oh, what did I write? Well, none of this makes sense. It wasn't like that. They were writing for the audience around them. They were writing for people so they could understand. So they were using images. They were using symbols they understood. And Matthew tying so much stuff into the Old Testament and also using language that they'd understand. They would know what it meant to be a son of God.
Well, and that's where we got to recognize they come from a full and fully formed culture.
Mhm.
This is not what we have in this book is such a tiny little piece. I was listening to a guy, a Jewish scholar, teach, and he was talking about, a lot of times when things happen in the Bible, we don't know where they are, if they're
Right.
inside, outside, are they standing, are they sitting, what are they wearing? We don't know this information. And in order to kind of be able to put ourselves back in these situations, we need to gather all the information we can, which
Sure.
means going back through the Bible, what applies, and then looking at Second Temple literature, looking what we can discover from archaeology,
Mhm.
Any source that we can get that's reliable,
Right.
and really plugging that into the Bible to help us understand the Bible.
Right. And there are plenty of scholars who are working to try to make more of this stuff accessible. You know, Emily, if for one. But there are also lots of other podcasts that do this, and we want to kind of bridge the gap, because I don't know if we actually mentioned this in our first episode, but part of the reason that we're doing this is because we want to make the scriptures accessible. Because even though there are lots of scholars who are doing great podcasts, they're writing great books, sometimes there is a bit of a language gap.
Mhm.
And so we want to try to make things simple, and we try to catch ourselves anytime we use a phrase or word that's not common. We try to define it. We try to steer away from jargon, because we think that the Bible, even though it's got layers and layers of complexity, I think many of those layers, particularly the layers that affect our daily lives, most of those things can be spoken in plain language. And that's where we're really going to get into what we do here, is trying to make it plain language. And we want it to also just be a conversation, casual. As you notice, we go everywhere with our topics. So,
And we're still being very well behaved compared to a normal conversation.
oh man, yeah, we're trying to stay focused for you. It's a sacrifice, because normally we would start on the Beatitudes, and we probably wind up in Acts, or then Ezekiel, and then
Zimbabwe.
we go everywhere. So thank you for hanging with us as we go through this little trek on the Beatitudes. I'm not sure what topic is for next week, but I believe you should, in the next few days, be getting hit with the main feature of Commentarians, where we will be doing Frida, as we announced in the coming attractions. Be sure to check that out. Me, Emily, and again, Joe Zaragoza from Commentarians, but also from Drinking at Bible Study. Go check those out. It's a whole lot of fun. We'll have links to all that in the show notes. It's a big celebration with the three of us on the relaunch of Commentarians. And then we got even more of those coming around the way. Got some interviews and some special guests, and be sure to check it out. In the meantime, if you like what you heard, or if you have a question, if we started something and we didn't finish it,
Which is very likely.
After editing episode 1, I have been going, I tend to start a lot of sentences that I don't finish. So if there's something you wanted to know what I was going to say, or what Emily was going to say, let us know. If you have questions about things we haven't even broached yet, hit us up. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Raven Creek SC, and ravencreeksc.com can get you to those places as well. And feel free to contact us. We look forward to hearing from you. Do you have anything else, Em?
No, I think we're good.
All right. Well, we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.
You've been listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, a Raven Creek Social Club production. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you like what you've heard, please write us a review on iTunes, or consider supporting us on patreon.com/RavenCreekSC. As always, thank you for listening, and don't forget to join us next week.